So good morning everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the Mises seminar. I hope everyone enjoyed themselves as much as I did yesterday. And for those who were out late, I think Jeffrey Tucker's got his bottle of gin. Perhaps taking a swig of that might help. Before we jump right in, if you could just make your phone silent, that'd be appreciated. Jeffrey Tucker obviously is a man who needs little introduction. But just kind of a recent update. So Jeffrey is the CEO of a new startup called Liberty.me, which is in essence a digital city. So I definitely advise you to check that out. His new book is called A Beautiful Anarchy, and his next forthcoming book is called Freedom as a Do-It-Yourself Project. Now, each year before its inception, the Mises Seminar has adopted an unofficial, controversial issue to stir debate and discussion. If you're new to Austro-libertarianism, then you may consider most of it, if not all of it, controversial. However, within the liberty movement, there are several issues where the true position remains contentious and without consensus. Although libertarians from all persuasions attempt to apply the non-aggression principle, they may reach a different conclusion if they adopt a different epistemology. Some examples are as follows. So in 2011, we had Hans Hermann-Hoppe kind of cover fractional reserve banking. Last year with Walter Block, we had he covered evictionism and abortion. And this year's topic is intellectual property rights. So the idea proposed is intellectual property rights are not just wrong and confused, but dangerous. So could you please welcome Jeffrey Tucker to the stage to speak about the economics and non-oil scarce resources, the Austrian contribution.
Of course, I'm super excited about this topic, and I hope you're all ready to have a great deal of fun with ideas this morning, because I hope that's what we're going to do. This stuff is a little bit challenging and somewhat speculative. It's a topic I've been thinking about for about 10 years, and I feel like I only now have enough clarity about it to speak about it with some degree of coherence. I'll let you decide whether or not I've actually achieved that. The topic is non-scarce goods. And, oh, listen, before I get into that, I have a kind of an interesting announcement. So just this morning, I got an email from a guy who had bought about 10,000 bitcoins a few years ago, and was grateful to freedom-oriented organizations and for all that they had done to educate him. So he threw 1,000 bitcoins over to the Foundation for Economic Education. And yeah, is that great? And so I was able to, and he was thanking me for this. You know, you can just imagine, right? So, I was able to make the announcement, you know, to the president of FEE and the board, and say, oh, by the way, guys, you just got $1 million, you know, thanks to me. No, I didn't have that. And so anyway, some people asked, you know, does this mean your speaking fees are going to go way up? You know, we'll see. But anyway, I think it's really great. Imagine a world in which the geeks just rule everything. You know, that's what we want, really. So the topic of non-scarce goods is a very interesting one because it falls outside the realm of economics. You know that in the first day of economics class, the professor always begins by saying, "What is economics?" Fortunately, this didn't happen to me. By the way, I decided to study economics when I got bored of music. Actually, what happened was I was a musician, and I got tired of hanging around the Department of Music because everybody's sort of bitter and resentful and hating the guts of society and consumers and you know musicians. I've spent 20 years studying the oboe. How come nobody's willing to pay me enough, you know, living wage? This is what you get in School of Music. So I got bored of being around dreary people. And thought, what else can I study? So I went over to the Department of Economics, and I walked into the head of the department. And I said, "What is economics anyway? Is this something I should study? What will I learn?" And he said, "You will learn how it is that civilizations rise and fall. You will learn what makes people wealthy or otherwise poor. You will learn the patterns of history." And I thought, look, I'm totally sold. All right, so I'm in. You know. Unfortunately, then I went through 2 years of Keynesianism. It wasn't quite what I had hoped. But anyway, every class begins with the same thing. Economics is the study of unlimited wants with scarce means. And what that means is there's not enough to go around. So it seems to restrict the economic logic to only things that are scarce, not things that are not scarce. So the title of my lecture today is The Economics of Non-Scarce Goods, which necessarily falls out of economics. So it gets a little bit tricky and a little bit speculative here. So let me start by, let me give you a little bit of background on this topic. So I came to this because it was about 10 years ago or so. I had read a few arguments about the subject of intellectual property, which are patents and copyrights and trademarks, for the most part. That's what's called intellectual property. And it's an attempt by legislation to take ideas and sort of allocate owners to those ideas. So that, for example, if I say anything at this lecture that you find particularly compelling, you'd be more or less stealing from me to walk away, and repeat them, right? This is the idea of intellectual property, in essence. Or if I whistle a tune to you, and you take it and publish you, I could sue you, or whatever. Provided I have all the right documentation from the right legislative agencies, since there's no such thing of intellectual property outside of government. In a market, you couldn't possibly replicate anything resembling intellectual property. It comes about through legislation only. So, like patents, for example, we had them at the U.S. founding. You can read about them in the U.S. Constitution. The founding fathers thought they had liberalized the patent system or made it more compatible with the free market because they invested the patent rights with the inventors themselves and took them away from the king. They thought they were really cool for doing that. And as usual, they overestimated their brilliance. And then copyrights are another case in point. It began, in England as a kind of 16th century measure to suppress religious thought that whatever the regime in charge at the time didn't like, and then it later became a kind of monopoly for favored publishers. So that's how copyrights came about. Interestingly, copyrights were not really applicable universally until the late 19th century. So, for example, even in the 19th century in the United States, people, one of the reasons Americans love British literature is that it was the most flourishing form of literature in the 19th century. All American works were all copyrighted and therefore extremely expensive and non-competitive. They're released on a monopolistic basis by one or another publisher. Whereas British literature, you could easily pirate all over the place and sell for just pennies or whatever. So all the kids in the little classrooms all across America read British literature all the time rather than American authors. That's one of the reasons that British literature is so popular. And also, it would really help the music industry, too, to not have international copyright. And on the continent, in Germany and in France and in Spain, there wasn't really copyright laws until the middle of the 19th century, or late in the 19th century. So composers like Beethoven and Brahms, and of course Bach, and going all the way back, never used copyright at all. It was just sort of a common thing that composers would borrow from each other. You'd hear a cool melody, you'd repeat the melody, rearrange it for choir, or whatever, harpsichord or string quartet or whatever. It was considered to be a great compliment. So how does anybody make money under this system? Well, you make money by being the first mover. So, for example, Beethoven had an exclusive arrangement with a publisher that he would sell his symphony to one publisher first. They'd get it out on the street before anybody could pirate it. They would make their monopoly profits before anybody else could rush to reprint it. The first mover advantage in the world of ideas is actually quite sticky in some strange way. People always ask, well, how can you possibly make money in a world without copyright or patent? Well, there are plenty of, for example, drugs in the United States that are sold without patent protection at all. And the drugstores, you can go in and to the aspirin section, which is like a part of the public domain. I mean, everybody knows how to make aspirin, And so there's this brand called Bayer, which is dates from the early part of the 20th century. And it sits right next to the, CVS or the Walgreens brand, which is like a third less. And so you're staring at these two brands, and you're thinking, so I have this terrible headache. Which one am I going to get? Am I going to get the Walgreens brand, which looks a little bit sketchy to me, or am I going to get the well-known, highly reliable Bayer brand? So you're willing to pay like a third more for whatever reason. I mean, it depends on your socioeconomic status or intelligence, probably. I always buy the Bayer, by the way, but. So this is sort of the way it works. If you're the first mover advantage in any marketplace, you can have monopoly, you can have profits for a very long time. They're quickly dissipated as you get people copying your ideas. And that's just the way a free market works. For the most part of human history, we've had no copyrights or patents. There's no such thing in the ancient world, not in the medieval world. It's very much of a modern invention. But listen, it became a serious problem in the digital age because suddenly, you had everything being shut down on grounds of intellectual property. Google Books tried to scan all the great libraries in the world and put them online for everybody, and they were quickly stopped by people complaining about violations of intellectual property laws. And then we saw what happened with Napster with file sharing, shut down completely on grounds of intellectual property. It became a huge deal in the case of big multinational corporations like Nike or whatever, enlisting the U.S. government, to go to China or whatever and beat everybody up, who dared to make a, pirate tennis shoe or something like that. It became very much an integral part of world trade legislation. Like the World Trade Organization has a whole section on intellectual property rights where world militaries are battling out to preserve industrial monopolies. So, I remember one time when I was in Washington, D.C., I'd always had a little bit of confusion about this subject because it's, as we heard, it's a little bit contentious. But I was on the street, and there was like some street vendor and selling a series of pirate Rolex watches. I mean, like, okay, a Rolex watch for $5. You're pretty sure that's not actually a real Rolex, right? Nobody's actually being defrauded here. But fake everything, fake Gucci bags or whatever. And the cops came, and I was really proud of this. I thought, well, I was very young, and I was like proud of this entrepreneur for doing these kind of cool things, selling stuff that people like. Nobody's being harmed here. This is great. But I was there when the police came and took all of his goods and arrested him on grounds that he was violating people's property rights. And I was puzzled by this. I thought, well, on one hand, I like this guy as an entrepreneur. On the other hand, he's violating people's property rights. Am I supposed to be against this guy or for this guy? It took me many years to finally realize that intellectual property legislation is totally contrary to everything in a free market, that it doesn't belong, that it wouldn't exist without legislation, without a state. And the world works just fine without it. You can point to specific industries in which this is true. For example, the fashion industry is a great example of this, right? Because, yes, it's true they have trademark, but they don't have copyright and they don't have patent. So that's why fashion is so interesting and so exciting. That's why it has such a really cool culture about it. So all the designers, sort of protect their designs very carefully, and nobody's allowed to find out. All the employees have to sign special agreements not to tell what the great designer has designed. And then comes showtime, in the spring when they're going to be rolling out the fall fashions. We all go to the cool shows, and the music begins to play, and here come the fashion, and people walking up and down, and the camera's going crazy like this, and then they're selling like, and so immediately when the stuff's available on the shelves, the dress by so-and-so is $1,000. A year later, you can buy it for $30 at Walmart, but because the piracy is freely allowed. And so you say, well, the system could never work. How can anybody make money like this? Well, it does work. It just means you have to stay on your toes. You have to be kind of hip and happening and always churning the machine all the time. In the fashion industry, it works perfectly well. And it's true even, there's all sorts of goods and services that today they're not subject to any intellectual property. Recipes, for example, are not subject to any intellectual property. For whatever reason, recipes, you can copy any recipe you want. But you can go to the local bookstore and see they have a ton of recipe books, right? So what's cool about the recipe books? Like, why are you buying this recipe book? Anybody can just get any recipe you want with your iPhone, instantly. Well, what's neat about them is they have, pictures, right? They show you how to make things. They have really great pictures, and it's fun. You get a sense, A lot of times I think people buy recipe books rather than deciding to eat food, actually. They're just... They're sort of looking through and, Yes, I think I'll live a Spanish life tonight by reading my recipe book, you know. Other areas where there are no football plays, for example, can't be copyrighted. So anytime you display the football play on the field, any other coach can watch what's going on and copy that for their very next game. There's all sorts of areas in life that are not subject to intellectual property. A recent study came out, actually, it said that the most significant inventions of the last 40 years, only 10% of them were ever patented, actually. So we tend to exaggerate the relevance of patents for industrial production. I hear people say this all the time, you know, because I discuss this issue with everybody and anybody because I'm obsessed with it. And the first thing they say is, well, I would never invent anything without a patent. Well, you know, the fact is I've never known anybody to invent anything because of the patent, you know. And when I was talking to a patent attorney the other day, I was on the phone with him, and I said, you know, I began to get very suspicious about people when they come up to me and say, I have a great idea, and I'm appealing to the patent office. I immediately know this is some crank with some useless notion that's wasting my time. He said, you know, I have that exact same sense. This is a patent attorney telling me this. So anyway, having looked at this whole subject and finally concluded that it's not necessary and we should get completely rid of intellectual property that's doing great damage to the world, and that if we extended it to the extent that people think it should be extended, basically the world would fall apart. We shouldn't have government involved in the business of slicing and dicing ideas and assigning them to people. There's many things wrong with that notion. You can't really contain an idea. An idea is very different from physical property, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. It's a non-scarce good versus a scarce good. So let me describe to you what a scarce good is so that we can get some clarity about definitions here. By scarce, I don't mean that there's not a whole lot of it. And by non-scarce, I don't mean that there's an abundance of it. It really has nothing to do with the quantity of it. For example, last night at dinner, there was a pile of beans on the table inside a bowl. Have you had these beans here in Australia? The little green beans, you know? I took one out of the bowl and shoved the whole thing in my mouth, and somebody from across the table went like this to me. You're supposed to open it up and just eat the inside part, right? So I was learning the ways of Australia here. The point is, the beans are not, they are scarce goods, even though there's a lot of beans and not many people wanted to it didn't seem like many people wanted to eat them, actually, as I think about it. But it doesn't matter, they're scarce goods. The point is that even if there are 50 beans in the bowl, and I take one out, that leaves 49. So that means that my eating of the bean, the 50th bean, prevented somebody else from eating that 50th bean. Okay, that means that there's a contest over the resources. If I'm eating the bean, then nobody else can be eating the bean. That means it's scarce. That's all it means. And there are a lot of things that fall into this category. So, for example, I'm wearing my shoes. You can't wear my shoes at the same time. This is my tie, not yours. And if you want to get it from me, you're going to have to pay me a lot of Bitcoin. So that's called a scarce good. It means that it can't be simultaneously be used by the same two people. It means that for all scarce goods, there's a contest over their consumption. So even in a world where there's fantastic numbers of everything for everybody, there's a tremendous amount of bananas. There's a tremendous amount of pork and pigs available to everybody. You know, it's like Walmart in the U.S., you know, you're overwhelmed, you know, with just this cornucopia of amazing stuff for practically for free. Still, it's all scarce goods because they're not reproducible. There's always a contest over their use. Incidentally, this is why socialism is absurd. Because, I mean, it's really difficult to take these ideas seriously. Right? Let's have socialism. Oh, really? Well, why don't we start with socialism over your shirt, you know, or your iPhone, all right? How's this work? How are we going to get more than one, you know, user of this good without breaking it into little tiny pieces? I mean, it's just simply not possible to have more than one simultaneous owner of a single scarce good. This is also why we need economics. You know, this is the key thing. Socialists don't understand economics, like, apparently at all, right? It just never occurred to them that that we have a problem that we're going to be beating each other up if we all try to simultaneously own the same scarce good. It's just not possible. We need some kind of system in a world of scarce goods for allocating them. And humanity figured out some time ago that it's a good thing to have things like property rights, and then you can trade with each other, and it's better to be nice to people rather than beat them over the head for their stuff. If you can find something that you have and get something that they have that you want, and mutually trade, so that you both come out ahead in the end, so you feel advantaged and the other person feels advantaged. You both benefit. That's a pretty cool system. And you expand that all over the world, you can have growing wealth and growing prosperity plus peace. That's a really good system for dealing with the problem of scarcity. And that's it, right? That solves the whole problem of scarcity. But there's a whole nother realm that I began to understand once I began to look into the subject of intellectual property, because IP deals with something else. It deals with things that are not scarce. Economics textbooks raise this subject at the very beginning, but they pass over it very quickly. Because why? Because it's not the subject of economics. They go, well, there are these things called free goods. That's what economics texts will typically refer to them. Free goods. What's a free good? Like the Armin Alchian book, right, mentions free goods. It's good. Every economics textbook says, well, this is stuff we're not going to deal with, these free goods. And they'll typically mention things like, well, let me just ask, can anybody mention what would be typically mentioned as a free good in economics text? Does anybody have an idea what that would be? Air. Air is always the first one. Another one is water, right? I don't think either air or water, what's another one? Anybody else? Okay, air and water, those are the two I always hear. And neither one really qualifies free goods, actually, because we're sitting in highly air-conditioned air, and it's rather scarce, right? If we spend a lot of money and time trying to fix up our air to make it exactly the way we want it to be. So I don't think that air really qualifies. And people are always trying to get away from dirty air and get towards clean air. I mean, it's not a reproducible good. And really, if you've ever been stuck in an elevator, you do have a profound sense that air is very scarce good, actually. And water, I mean, there's a gigantic global industry for bottling water. Bottled water always drives the left crazy. Have you ever noticed this? They can't stand the idea anybody's bottling water and selling it. They think this is just somehow immoral. It's so funny. I can't tell the difference between these things, can you? I mean, they all taste exactly the same, but you do have a difference. If you're drinking Fiji water, you have a sense that, you're drinking part of Fiji or something. I don't know what. Anyway, so water and air, really, I think they both actually are scarce goods. So so I think that most textbooks are wrong about this, actually. So what is a non-scarce good? A non-scarce good is something like a song. So I'm a big fan of Gregorian chant, for example. Really into it. And I got into it because I was intrigued that something like a melody that would have been written out or thought of in the 5th century or the 6th century would have been transported from person to person, across countries and continents, and eventually written down and then and printed and taken all over the world and land into my lap, in 2013, and I can sing it. I mean, that's a great thing. And my singing of that chant doesn't take away anybody else's singing of that chant. It's a non-scarce good, so it's infinitely reproducible. It's an infinitely reproducible song. And I can change it so it becomes malleable. I can remix it and put it to a really cool Lady Gaga beat, or whatever. And I can pass it on to somebody else. It doesn't take away my capacity to sing the song because I've given it to somebody else. I can give it around freely and share it with anyone and everyone. Another feature of a non-scarce good is that it doesn't ever depreciate over time. Scarce goods always sort of just tend to lose value, just ashes to ashes and all that kind of stuff. Everything sort of loses value in the physical world, but in the world of non-scarce goods, there's no depreciation whatsoever. So it's pretty spectacular when you think about non-scarce goods. And all goods in the world have always and everywhere consisted of these two properties: scarce properties and non-scarce properties. Everything does. So, what's a good example? Think about a key, like a key that opens a door. Not fancy keys in this five-star hotel that are like cards or whatever, but like old-fashioned keys that you turn, you stick in and turn. So it's got scarce properties and non-scarce properties. The scarce properties of the key itself. It's just a physical thing. If I'm holding that key, you can't hold it. There's going to be a contest over the key if we decide we both want to hold it. We're going to have to beat each other up. So it's a scarce in its physical aspects, but it's non-scarce in its shape. And because it's got certain non-scarce properties, it can be reproduced, exactly. So you can create potentially trillions and trillions of copies of this key because it has non-scarce features. Something like, if you go home and you think, well, I'm just very hungry for like a raisin and carrot muffin. Do you eat those here, raisin and carrot muffins? Yeah, you don't? Okay, well in the US they're very popular. It's very strange. It's like some sort of vegetable thing for breakfast. I don't know why. But anyway, let's think of another kind of muffin then that makes more sense for you. Banana muffin. You eat banana muffin? No? Okay. A Vegemite muffin. How about that? Okay. So we make the muffin itself is a scarce good. But the recipe that made the muffin is a non-scarce good. So you can share it around, and anybody can make that same muffin. I mean, if you shared your Vegemite muffin recipe with your neighbor, you're not going to suddenly discover that you can't make that same muffin again. They haven't taken anything away from you. You've reproduced the capacity to make that thing. So the muffin has both scarce and non-scarce properties, and everything does. Something like the Gutenberg Bible, all right? Think about that. Pretty spectacular. Well, it has scarce properties in the sense that it's a book. And it's made of vellum and probably leather and ink. And in order to be printed, it had to be printed on a scarce printer over which there's a contest. And yet, the information within the book could be reproduced an infinite number of times. In fact, it could be memorized and reproduced. So it has non-scarce properties too. The Gutenberg Bible. All books have scarce and non-scarce properties. Okay, let's imagine a world in which things that were once scarce become non-scarce. Somebody mentioned to me last night there's a popular Australian book called The Magic Pudding. Has anybody? Magic Pudding? So I haven't read The Magic Pudding, but I want to read The Magic Pudding. But the example I like to give is The Magic Bagel, because I'm an American. So the magic bagel is that I bring home a dozen bagels to my roommates, and I warn everybody, do not eat these. But one roommate gets the munchies late at night, and he goes up to the box and pulls out a bagel and eats it. And to his astonishment, another bagel appears. And he thinks, can't be true. So he eats another one, and sure enough, another bagel appears. And he goes on like this for several days. Surreptitiously sort of hiding the fact that he's doing this. And finally he can't stand it anymore. He decides to confess his theft to his roommates, just on grounds that this is just too good not to share. And he tells them, look, there's something weird about these bagels. Like every time I eat one, another one just appears. And his roommates try it, and sure enough, they discover this too, that these bagels are, and somebody, probably an economist in the room, just says, really, it seems like these bagels are a non-scarce good. I don't know how this happened, but it's migrated. It made the great leap from scarcity to non-scarcity. From now on, we don't have to have prices, or even property rights associated with these non-scarce goods. We could just eat all we want. Well, so let's imagine a world in which the Gutenberg Bible loses all of its scarceness and becomes entirely a non-scarce good. Well, how might that happen? Well, it could be uploaded to a distributed network and live on nodes around the world and shared peer-to-peer. and available for download, for example. In other words, you could have something like the internet. Okay? So the internet is a great copying machine that has accomplished the great goal of all human history, which is to convert scarce goods into non-scarce goods. And that's just an extraordinary thing. And that's what changed everything, and it's why it becomes so extremely important for us to understand the difference between these things. Okay, so let me back up for a second and see if there's any kind of historical precedent for the absurd things that I'm saying, just so that you don't think I'm utterly out of my mind. And discerning this issue and kind of marching through this issue in my own mind, I mean, I began with the subject of copyrights and patents and trademarks. But what it began to do, the study of this whole subject began to do, is open up a completely new realm of this world of non-scarce goods. And I began to see it, you know, all around me when I discovered this. You know, you realize just the power of information and the sheer sort of, I don't know what you want to call it, collectivism, socialism, communism of information, the fact that everything can be shared, you know, infinitely, and just how important communication and information is to us and our world, and how important is it that information is a non-scarce good. I mean, in the history of the world, you know, why is it that cities were so enormously prosperous, whereas the countryside always kind of languished in poverty, is always behind? Well, a major reason is that in the city, people could share information with each other. I mean, communicating with each other allows more than just, I'm passing on my ideas to you and you're passing on your ideas to me. It means that together we can remix our ideas and come up with something completely new. This is why great conversations happen, right? We've all known the difference between two kinds of meetings. Those in which we're all just kind of like giving our perspective, and then whoever's in charge of the meeting decides who's right, and then we all walk away disappointed and grumbling and have a 3-martini lunch. Or the other kind of meeting in which something really spectacular happens, which we all sort of throw out ideas, and then together we all realize something completely new. And this is when ideas become truly beautiful and truly spectacular. It's the newness and the freshness and the discovery that takes place in the sharing of ideas, where real productivity and real glorious things happen. And that's why cities have always been so prosperous, because of the passing on of information and the discovery of new knowledge out of old knowledge. And it's because knowledge and ideas and information are non-scarce that we can just use it and pass it on. The immortal glory of ideas that we can learn from the great scholars of the past, that we can freely share with other people without reducing the value of our own ideas. That's what makes it so beautiful. So let me just kind of go through some history here, and I'm going to start way back in the 4th century with the words of St. Augustine. And then I'll move forward to the Austrian tradition so I can establish something of a basis for what I'm saying here. So St. Augustine, I can only imagine, he was a preacher actually. I can only imagine what he was going through when he said this, but he says, "The words I'm uttering penetrate your senses so that every hearer holds them, and yet withholds them from no other. I have no worry that by giving all to one, the others are deprived. I hope instead that everyone will consume everything, so that denying no other ear or mind, you take it all to yourselves and leave all to the others. But for the individual affairs of memory, everyone came to hear what I can say, can take all of it away, each on one's own separate way." Now, he said this, I think, because I read the entire sermon, in the context of discussing God's grace. So God's grace, like if I decide to become, if I decide to have eternal life, then it doesn't take away your right to have eternal life. I mean, it'd be sort of grim, right? Like, I mean, I'd feel a sense of guilt, right? Like, well, I think I'll have eternal life, and then one of you just, like, drops dead, you know? That'd be sort of a regret. I mean, imagine if Christianity began this way, like, you know, Jesus said, and so 10,000 of you will have eternal life, you know, and then disappeared. And then it left it to the apostles to allocate these scarce goods, you know. But it would change the whole nature of religion, right? I mean, it would have. Should we allocate them all in this one generation, or save a few for our children and grandchildren? Yeah, it would have changed everything. No, so the idea that St. Augustine his point was that God's grace is an infinitely multipliable thing. It can be distributed infinitely among the whole population forever. So just because, and this is pretty spectacular, you know, that God's grace is available to everyone. And neither does it just depreciate, right? Like, so it's not like one person gets like 90%, leaving only 10% for the next people, or, you know, so every new person who gets saved, you know, is saved a little less than the previous person or anything like that. No, I mean, like every person gets 100%. So God's grace is a non-scarce good, and St. Augustine, he didn't say it this way, but it's because he didn't hear this lecture, but he would have. So he's making an analogy there between God's grace and his own sermon that he's giving. And he's telling people, he said, look, whatever I'm saying, you can take it out of here. And it doesn't take away my capacity to give this same damn lecture again tomorrow, actually, you know. I mean, he's explaining that ideas are infinitely reproducible, just like God's grace is infinitely reproducible. And that's what makes it spectacular. So the next guy, and a typical modern, I'm going to jump straight from St. Augustine to Thomas Jefferson, leaving all the time in between like it's totally irrelevant. Thomas Jefferson says, this is really interesting. He says, if nature has made any one thing less susceptible than all others of exclusive property, is the action of a thinking power called an idea, which an individual may exclusively possess as long as he keeps it to himself, but the moment it is divulged, it forces itself out of the possession of every one, and the receiver cannot dispossess himself of it. It's so like if you sing a song and it just sticks in my ear like a ball of wax, you know, I can't get rid of it, then that's no harm to you. It's just something I'm carrying on. He said that ideas should freely spread from one to the other all over the globe, for the moral and mutual instruction of man and the improvement of his conditions seems to have been peculiarly and benevolently designed by nature when she made them, like fire, expandable all over the place, without lessening their density at any point, and like the air in which we breathe, I disagree with him there, move and have our physical being, incapable of confinement or exclusive appropriation. Inventions then cannot in nature be subject of property. Isn't that great? Thomas Jefferson, he was a really cool guy. He really had a lot of things going, but I like his analogy of fire. There's a liturgy in the Roman Catholic religion in which, I think it's Holy Thursday, in which there's a fire lit to the back of the room and then it's passed up, you know, from candle to candle. Maybe you've all done this kind of thing. You know, probably Wiccans do this too. I don't really know. But you know, so the fire can be just passed on and it's not extinguished, and just because it would be pretty weird if at one of these ceremonies you had your candle and you helpfully lit somebody else's candle, you looked at yours and you went out. You're like, what the heck? So you say, can I have my fire back, please? And so you give it to you and theirs goes out. And so that would just be a disaster, right? So it doesn't work that way. You just keep spreading and spreading. That's the way ideas are. Okay, now let's move up to the Austrian tradition and see if the Austrians themselves seem to be aware of the difference between scarce and non-scarce goods. Karl Menger seems to have understood this. And the beginning of his book, The Principles of Economics, which if you haven't read, you should definitely read it. It still remains one of the best tutorials on economics ever written. He says that with goods, he defines what goods are. And he says, in the first place, goods have to be something you like and want. So, for example, if I make a mud pie and nobody likes it, it's not really an economic good, right? I mean, it's scarce, but nobody really likes it. So it's not really an economic good. On the other hand, he says if somebody does like it, like I make an iPhone, and people do like it, then it becomes a good. But he says in particular, for it to be subject to economic constraints, it must be scarce. So based on Karl Menger, I went through a period in which I had sort of laid out this chart where I had goods here and non-goods here, scarce goods here and non-scarce goods here, and I couldn't look around anywhere in the world without plugging in everything in existence in one of these categories, right? So a scarce non-good versus a scarce good, a non-scarce good versus a non-scarce non-good. That you really don't want to be a non-scarce non-good. I mean, that's just like no value whatsoever to anybody. So that's Menger. I mean, he didn't actually come out and oppose copyrights and patents or anything like that, but he seemed to have the basis, a pretty good basis for for thinking about the subject. The next person in line here was Bambarvik, who was actually a successor of Menger at the University of Vienna. And he went through a long and tortured essay trying to discover whether or not justice was an economic good. Has anybody read, have you seen this essay, Justice as an Economic Good? You've read it. Of course, you've read everything, Conrad. God, jeez. Why does anybody else lecture here? It's unbelievable. So it's a very interesting lecture. He's trying to discover whether or not things like justice as an economic good. And in the end, it's a little bit of a confused essay. I mean, I think in the end he concludes that it really isn't. But at least he was addressing the right subjects. You know, what kinds of things can be covered by economics. Mises has a pretty good section on this in Human Action, on the existence of non-scarce goods. He calls them free goods. Something that's available in superfluous abundance, which man does not need to economize. This is a very significant thing. If you don't have to economize non-scarce goods, think what that means. It means there's no structure of production. It means there doesn't have to be any prices. It means that you don't have to expend any additional resources in their production. You might have to initially, but once they're produced, you don't have to anymore. It means they're not going to be subject to any kind of, like Mises says, that they're not the subject of any action, given the example. And he gives the example of a recipe in particular. And he calls it a non-scarce good that renders unlimited services for an unlimited amount of time. It does not lose anything from its capacity to produce, however often it is used. Its productive power is inexhaustible, and therefore it is not an economic good. Now, again, even the Austrians are very interesting on this subject because, I mean, they're all economists, right? So once they discuss the existence of these non-scarce goods, they all do the same thing. They're kind of done with them because they think, well, I'm an economist, therefore this doesn't really concern me. This is kind of regrettable in a way because it means that, you know, leave it to other fields. Nonetheless, I'm digging through this just because I think it's important. Now, here's what Rothbard says. There's another unique type of factor of production that's indispensable in every stage of every production process. This is what he calls the technological idea. He says that the idea, once it comes about, it no longer has to be produced, is the unlimited factor of production that never wears out and never needs to be economized by human action. That's Rothbard. Okay. This last quote I'm giving from Hayek was amazing to me because one problem with Hayek is that Hayek has not been put into the non-scarce realm of the digital world yet because it's all subject to copyright, damn it. So we can't even read the stuff. Nonetheless, I gave about a 2-hour lecture one drunken evening in Canada out on a weird farm where it was raining. I was under a tent and nobody had anything to do but to listen to me. So I spoke for like 2 hours on the subject of intellectual property rights. And afterwards, my friend Steve Horwitz said, "Oh, I found something from Hayek you might enjoy. It's one paragraph that summarized everything you said for the last 2 hours." But I was excited about this because he does indeed summarize everything. I mean, it's from this book that called The Constitution of Liberty. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of read the whole paragraph because this is kind of an epic paragraph that really sums up everything that I had been thinking for like the last 10 years, but I had never read this before. It's just really thrilling to me. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to read it straight. The rapid economic advance that we've come to expect seems in large measure to be the result of an inequality, of this inequality, and to be impossible without it. Okay, that's a reference to something before. Okay, but the rise of our standard of life is due at least as much to increase in knowledge, which enables us not merely to consume more of the same things, but to use different things. And often we did not even know this before. And though the growth of income depends in part on the accumulation of capital, it probably more depends on our learning to use resources more effectively for our new purpose. This growth of knowledge is of such special importance, the growth of knowledge, which he just got through saying is more important than the accumulation of capital. This is F.A. Hayek. The growth of knowledge is more important than the accumulation of capital. The growth of knowledge is of special importance because while the material resources will always remain scarce, and will have to be reserved for limited purposes, the users of new knowledge, where we do not make them artificially scarce by patents of monopoly, are unrestricted. Knowledge once achieved becomes, great phrase, gratuitously available for the benefit of all. It is through this free gift of knowledge acquired by the experiments of some members of society that general progress is made possible, and that the achievements of those who have gone before facilitate the advances of those who follow. I mean, that's it, right? And what he's drawing attention to is something absolutely spectacular. And I think I would describe it as the sharing, caring, I was going to say socialistic side of the capitalist system. It's the knowledge that it generates for everybody that's gratuitously available to everyone. Every capitalist act has this element to it. The examples you can give are just without limit, really. Every act of entrepreneurship is, in a sense, a public act of sharing. So the first, I'm just going to come up with an example out of my head. So the first person who put wheels on a suitcase, right, is taking quite a risk, because as soon as the first person is walking down an airport, going faster than all of his mates, that's a new word I've learned in Australia, mates, then he has advertised something wonderful that other people can copy and will do so pretty quickly. Now, would the maker of that suitcase be happy to keep that information proprietary about that you can stick wheels on a suitcase and make it cooler than ever? Yeah, probably, but you can't do that in a capitalist marketplace. No, all your greatest ideas have to be given away if you want to sell your stuff. So even the restaurant next door, has some pretty nice little quiche Lorraine, right? Would they like to keep their recipes secret? Would they like to keep secret the fact that they're able to make a lot of money selling quiche Lorraine? They would love to, but they cannot. Because as capitalists, they have to sell to the public. They have to give away their knowledge. They can privatize their profits, but how they made that money, that's a free gift to all. In my hometown, there was a barbershop. And which they put a ping pong table. And everyone wanted to go to that barbershop because while you're waiting to get your hair cut, you can play ping pong. Pretty nice idea, right? But then other barbershops in town said, hey, we can put a ping pong table on our place too. Not a problem. So they copied the idea, put ping pong tables in their place. But then the first place went out of business, actually, because it turned out not many people really wanted to play ping pong. So the other people put out there, saw, hey, those guys flopped. Let's get rid of the ping pong table. And so it is. Everybody's copying everybody all the time. McDonald's in my hometown, this past Lent came out with fish McBites. Pretty good food, actually, fish McBites. And so the Checkers hamburger place right down the street came out like 2 days later with Checkers Fish McBites. Exactly the same product, exactly the same price, Now, this is very interesting to me because, as rationalists, we always try to figure out how things work, right? This system would never work. Everybody's just copying everybody. Nobody's ever going to make any money. Well, it turns out it does work. Because there's no patents and no copyrights in the fast food industry. Anybody can steal anything, and it works beautifully. The successes of capitalism are always broadcast to all of humanity, and thank God for that, right? We need this system. We need this radical globalized sharing of success. Every successful capitalist act has private profits and a public benefit in the sharing of how those profits are made. And it's not just the profits, it's also the losses. capitalists gain information from other people's failures. I'm now running a startup, and believe me, I'm very interested in what makes other startups fail because I don't want to repeat those errors. So I'm the beneficiary of this information, which is constantly broadcast out. Once you begin to think about this subject, you realize just how incredibly important information is to the whole world. And sometimes I look out over a crowd and I don't quite see you or your faces. I imagine the floating information above all of you in colorized rainbows, ripping through the room and swimming and dancing in all kinds of different directions, because that's the really cool stuff. It's within the realm of ideas that we can see the future. The things that we see are all a result of the ideas of the past. The future would be built by the things you're thinking in your head right now. And if I could see them, they would be absolutely spectacular. That's the realm of non-scarce goods. Now let me discuss what's happened since 1995. We got this thing called the internet. And I remember so well the first book I put online, because I thought, this is kind of stupid. I'm going to do it anyway. But then a week later, I wanted to read that book, and it was across the room 4 feet away from me, and I was too lazy to go get it. So I clicked on my computer and got the book. And I thought, well, this is kind of nice. It just proves how lazy I am, but, But then I realized, well, wait a minute. I still happen to have this book 4 feet away from me, but also there are other people in the world besides me who might not have the book 4 feet away from me. They could be living in Beijing, they could be living in Belarus, they could be in India, they could be in Salvador, they could be anywhere. And so long as they have an internet connection, they could read this book at the same time as me. And because they're reading it doesn't mean that I can't read it. It's not like I would click online and try to read the book and, oh, sorry, there's a guy in Salvador reading it, you can't read it right now. No, it's a non-scarce good. It's a non-scarce good. That book that used to be 4 feet away from me, read only by me, could now be read simultaneously by 7 billion people forever and ever and ever. That's a big transformation. It migrated because I scanned it and pressed the button, upload. I caused a physical good to migrate out of the realm of scarce goods into the infinite, malleable, and immortal world of non-scarce goods. That's total liberation. And that's what we've seen since 1995. The physical world gradually moving to the cloud, changing everything. It began with email. Then it moved to pictures and images and sound. And now, we've seen it move actually to the realm of money, which how this plays out in the realm of Bitcoin, I will probably not address, but it's very interesting. I mean, essentially what Satoshi did is he hacked the non-scarce realm to create an artificial form of scarcity. This is an amazing thing to think of, yeah. But look what's also happening. It's happening in the realm of physical goods now, even now too, right? With 3D printing, think about it. All physical things are going to be moved to the world of non-scarce goods. And this is the basis of the wonderful prosperity we're going to experience in the future. Does that mean scarcity is going away? Absolutely not. It's always going to be part of the future of the world. This side of heaven, as the old Catholic prayer says, lacrimalum vale, in this valley of tears. There will always be scarcity, right? But we strive and we work, and we've been doing it for thousands of years, struggling as a civilization. Let's find ways to make things ever more abundant. And in 1995, with the privatization of the internet, we crossed that great barrier. We left one age and entered another. We left a dark age and entered into the light. We left the age bounded by the rules and constraints of scarcity and entered into a realm in which we can all throughout the rest of our lives, and our children and their children can work to put ever more of the physical world into the cloud and bring prosperity and the blessings of freedom and material abundance to ever more of humanity now and forever. And in my last speech, I'll discuss how we can work towards that end. Thank you.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions.
Oh.
Sorry, Jeff.
I can't believe you have any questions about that totally clear lecture.
Coming from Hong Kong, my home is maybe 30 kilometers away from the Chinese Silicon Valley, Shenzhen, which I consider the greatest copycat center in Hong Kong. So my question is, the United States should be the country that emphasize intellectual private property right the most. Is it because of a national security consideration that?
No, it's not national security.
I'm kind of like a protectionism because we have the greatest copycat on earth, like the Chinese.
No, it's mercantilism. It's the last remaining element of mercantilism that always existed. You know, mercantilism is a system that gives producer privileges, right? It used to be this way that you know, some merchant would come to the king and say, look, I really want to bring salt to your realm, but I'm not going to do it unless you make me the exclusive salt provider. And if you don't, I probably won't show up again. So they kind of have a system, you know, you'll be the exclusive salt guy. And that was the old mercantilist system. So intellectual property is just a remnant of mercantilism. It's just that with the national security state, you know, it's become a sort of fascistic imperialist project on the part of the U.S. to enforce intellectual property all over the world. Fortunately, it's been a spectacular failure, and China is mainly prosperous and has probably a bigger economy than the U.S. today, mainly because of piracy. And I thank God for that. I think it's a very beautiful system. This whole thing is going away, one little bit at a time. Copyright is falling apart. Patents are falling apart. It's essentially unsustainable. I like to compare it to the way anti-usury laws were common in the Middle Ages. And as technology, I mean, it's very common in the Middle Ages, all of Europe enforced anti-usury laws. You weren't allowed to charge interest on anything or collect interest on anything. But as the institutions, money and banking institutions became ever more sophisticated, there were ever more reasons why basically states had to kind of lessen the restrictions on usury. First, it's like, well, okay, if you're giving up your money for a certain period of time, then yeah, you can get a payment in return for that. If you're borrowing money and you make money doing it, then yeah, you pay a person a percentage of the return of the profits for that. So there's all these exceptions being made. It's this way in copyright. This is what's happening. Like YouTube, when it first started allowing you to post videos, had like 3 kinds of copyright, and now when you post a video on YouTube, it has like 30 different kinds of categories of copyright. This is just evidence of a system in decay. I mean, I'm particularly interested in the music area because, you know, a century ago, you know, at the turn of the century with internationalization of copyright, which is such a disaster for musicians, because musicians are just like the best copycats ever. I mean, this is what we specialize in, right? And so then we had suddenly a new international regime said, don't copy anything ever. Every song you ever write has got to be totally fresh, totally, you know, sui generis. And, you know, it's got to be something absolutely brand new. You wonder why such crappy music came out in the 1920s in the classical music realm, you know, where everything started sounding really weird and unlistenable, and, you know, like, this sounds like the most horrible thing I've ever heard in my life. It's because they had to write everything completely fresh and weren't allowed to copy anything. I mean, the composers don't do this. I mean, the progress of music is about copying. And the only progress in music, actually, we saw in the 20th century was all as a result of piracy. I mean, the whole culture of rock and roll and jazz and all that was all based in piracy and aggressive violation of copyright laws. It's the only way that progress ever happens is by violating these kinds of laws. In the realm of serious music, on the other hand, there's very little progress at all, with very few exceptions. But nowadays, it's really hilarious to me how, you know, whatever Miley Cyrus's new song comes out, you know, like within 24 hours, there's like 200 covers of it already available on YouTube, you know, that squeeze through these little loopholes. Now, you have to understand, this is totally in contradiction to the way copyright was supposed to work. I mean, it's no longer being enforced anything like what it was. Yes, there's still the rules and regulations and the grim and everything else, but you're seeing the whole regime begin to collapse more and more. And in the case of piracy in China, I mean, basically everybody's given up. Yeah, it's in the World Trade Regulations that you're not allowed to violate trademark. But, you know, the thing is that, like, companies themselves have begun to learn that piracy is good for them. You know, like in the case of Nike, what Nike does is they'll come out with, you know, in a typical season, like 550 new models of tennis shoes, but they can't put them all in production. So what they do is they put them out there, and they want to see which ones are the fastest to be pirated. They want to see, and they track this stuff very, very carefully. And whichever ones are the most pirated shoes, they put those into production. They need the pirates. The pirates are helping. You know, they're making the world a more wonderful place, and people are beginning to recognize this. So, IP law is going away. Yeah.
Okay, so say that the internet provides a vehicle for knowledge to be available to all forever. Okay, and I understand that that's a non-scarce information, but that relies on the scarce goods of physical equipment, power and buildings. So you're very optimistic. So if systems failed and we lost that cloud,
Yeah.
then we would just fall back on the old ways of shared knowledge, books and traditions.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with books and traditions and all that kind of thing. But, you know, the important thing to remember is that the internet is a distributed network, so that if everything in Brisbane was taken down, you know, everything everywhere else will live. As long as there's even one node remaining, everything could be refired up and be recreated. I mean, this is like, I don't know what to compare it to, but it's like, a what?
Bacteria.
A bacteria. That's right. I was thinking about a snake or something. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what anyway, yeah, Medusa. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. There's no way to kill it, you know. Somebody asked me last night, like, well, what happened if there was, what was it? Somebody, you said like a ray coming, like a...
Yeah, like that solar flare.
A solar flare, right. Well, you know, that would all, you know, because it can destroy the whole world or whatever. But, you know, as soon as the solar flare, I don't know. I mean, the point is that you can destroy everything as long as there's one node that comes back at some point in time, then everything could be instantaneously recreated forever. That's pretty darn magical, you know, if you think about it. Right, but it certainly would be. I mean, this is the beautiful thing about the blockchain. It's unkillable. So the distributed network is the great magic power killer of all time. You know, as long as you can put something on the internet, then somewhere it's going to exist forever outside the realm of any nation states. And, you know, it's just a great thing when you think of the sheer power of ideas and how much more powerful and significant ideas are than any physical thing that exists in the world. And if we had the choice of having physical objects on a distributed network or ideas on a distributed network, we'd far rather choose ideas because they're far more significant to the future of humanity. So, you know, the internet is in many ways just the dream that we've always wanted. I mean, it's a perfect support for freedom, not just because we can share cool ideas like, you know, books by Bastiat or whatever, but because humanity needs that connection. You know, we need to be bound together by these in the non-scarce realm. We need to live together in the cloud, forever sharing ideas and coming up with new ideas together. We've all moved to the same city as a global humanity. We've all moved to the same little city block, and we're all getting along together. Thank God we don't have to be there with each other physically. But just intellectually, this is a very beautiful thing and a great moment in history. And I'm so grateful to be alive, and I hope you feel the same way.
Awesome. That's all the time we have.